Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People's Story. 3 months ago, I finally achieved one of my biggest life goals. After years of saving and working overtime at my software development job, I purchased my first home in what seemed like a peaceful neighborhood with well-maintained properties and friendly neighbors. Well, most of them were friendly. The jewel of my new property was my custom-designed driveway. Most homes in the area had standard concrete driveways, but I splurged on a wider-than-average stamped concrete design with subtle drainage channels built into the pattern. It cost me an extra $8,000, but it was worth every penny. The driveway was not only beautiful, but practical, especially during our area's notorious rainstorms. I'd obtained all the proper permits and had it installed by a well-respected local company. Working from home as a software developer meant I spent a lot of time in my house. For security reasons, I installed a comprehensive camera system covering my front yard, driveway, and backyard. Little did I know how valuable this decision would become. My first encounter with the HOA president happened during the welcome committee visit 2 days after I moved in. 3 neighbors brought cookies and information packets, but the woman who introduced herself as the HOA president immediately stood out. She arrived separately from the others in her gleaming white Range Rover with custom wheels, parking it prominently at the curb as if it were on display. "That's an interesting choice for a driveway," she remarked, barely hiding her disdain while the other neighbors complimented my landscaping. "Most homeowners here prefer a more traditional look. You did get that approved by the architectural committee, right?" I explained that I had all the necessary approvals, including from the HOA architectural committee, but she just pursed her lips and handed me a thick binder of HOA regulations. "Please familiarize yourself with these. We take our community standards very seriously," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Over the following weeks, I noticed her Range Rover driving by my house frequently, sometimes slowing down as she passed. At the monthly HOA meeting, when I tried to introduce myself to more neighbors, she barely acknowledged me and quickly steered conversations away whenever I joined a group. I soon learned from my next-door neighbor that the HOA president ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist. She'd been president for 6 years running, and most residents were too intimidated to run against her. Her husband apparently served on the city council, which she leveraged to get her way on community issues. "Just stay on her good side," my neighbor warned. "She can make your life miserable if you cross her." I tried to follow that advice, keeping my head down and focusing on settling into my new home and remote work routine. My trusty Toyota 4Runner, which I'd bought certified pre-owned 3 years ago, sat proudly in my driveway. It wasn't fancy like her Range Rover, but it was reliable, paid off, and perfectly suited my needs. Then came the rainy Thursday morning that changed everything. I was in the middle of a video conference when I heard a loud crash outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against concrete. I quickly put my meeting on hold and rushed to my front window. There in my driveway was the HOA president's white Range Rover, its front end crumpled against my decorative boulder landscaping, which bordered my driveway. The passenger side was deeply scratched where it had scraped against my concrete retaining wall. Fluid was leaking steadily onto my driveway from underneath the vehicle. I grabbed my phone, pulled up my security camera app, and quickly reviewed what had happened. The footage clearly showed her attempting to use my wide driveway to make a 3-point turn. She had backed in, then accelerated forward much too quickly for the wet conditions. The Range Rover hydroplaned on the rainy surface, sending her sliding into my landscaping and retaining wall. By the time I got outside, she was already on her phone, gesturing wildly while inspecting the damage to her vehicle. "This is absolutely ridiculous!" she shouted when she saw me approaching. "Your driveway is a safety hazard! Look what it did to my car!" I was taken aback. "Your car? You just crashed into my property? Why were you even in my driveway?" "I needed to turn around," she snapped, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "But this ridiculous stamped concrete gets slippery when wet. The HOA should never have approved this. Do you know how much this Range Rover costs?" I pointed to my security cameras. "I have the whole thing on video. You were driving too fast for the conditions. That has nothing to do with my driveway design." She barely glanced at the cameras before continuing her tirade. "Well, obviously your drainage is insufficient. Water shouldn't pool on a properly designed driveway." There was no visible pooling anywhere. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "You were trespassing on my property. I'll need your insurance information to cover the damage to my landscaping and retaining wall." She laughed dismissively. "My insurance? You'll be lucky if I don't sue you for this hazardous condition." Just then, her Range Rover made an ominous grinding noise and more fluid dripped onto my driveway. She tried to start it, but the engine just made a horrible noise. "Great," she muttered, then turned to me with what I can only describe as audacity personified. "I'll need to borrow your SUV." I thought I'd misheard her. "Excuse me?" "Your Toyota," she said, gesturing to my 4Runner. "I need to borrow it until my car is fixed. It's the least you can do considering your defective driveway caused all this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Absolutely not. I'm not lending you my vehicle. You need to call a tow truck and get your Range Rover off my property." Her face transformed from entitlement to fury in seconds. "Do you have any idea who I am? My husband is on the city council. I run this neighborhood. That doesn't give you the right to use my driveway without permission or demand my car," I replied, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the police to file a report about the damage to my property." "You'll regret this," she hissed, snatching her designer purse from her vehicle. "I'll have you drowning in HOA violations before the week is out. You clearly don't understand how things work around here." She stomped off down the street, presumably heading home, while I called the police to report the incident. The responding officer was professional, took my statement, and reviewed the security footage. He confirmed that she was clearly at fault and issued a citation for trespassing and property damage. A tow truck came for her Range Rover shortly after, leaving behind a trail of oil and transmission fluid on my driveway. True to her word, an official HOA violation letter appeared in my mailbox the very next day. According to this notice, my property was suddenly in violation of 6 different HOA regulations, including unapproved driveway modifications, improper landscaping features creating safety hazards, and inadequate property maintenance. The fines totaled $2,800, with a demand that I rectify all violations within 7 days. Her signature was at the bottom of the letter, with no indication that the other board members had been consulted. Over the next few days, I noticed neighbors suddenly becoming distant. When I waved, they would quickly look away or hurry inside. My next-door neighbor finally explained what was happening. "She's telling everyone your driveway doesn't meet code and that you're refusing to fix it," he told me quietly over the fence. "She's saying the HOA might have to raise dues to cover legal expenses if you fight her on this." I was furious, but determined not to let her intimidate me. I started researching the HOA bylaws thoroughly and discovered several procedural requirements for issuing violation notices, including that 2 board members must inspect the alleged violation independently. Then things escalated further. A notice appeared on my door about an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for the following evening to discuss urgent safety concerns in the neighborhood. The meeting location was changed from the usual community center to the HOA president's house, and the time was moved up 2 hours from the regular meeting time. I arranged to have my work meetings covered and made sure to attend, walking into a room where most of the chairs were already filled with residents who looked uncomfortable. The HOA president sat at the head of the room with 2 other board members flanking her. "How nice of you to join us," she said, with fake pleasantness when I entered. "We were just discussing the safety hazard you've created in our community." For the next 20 minutes, she presented a completely fictional account of how my driveway violated building codes, created a neighborhood eyesore, and posed a serious liability to anyone who might need to access my property. She even had blown-up photos of her damaged Range Rover, claiming it was evidence of the dangerous conditions. When I tried to speak, she repeatedly cut me off or spoke over me. The few neighbors who attempted to ask reasonable questions were quickly silenced with reminders about increasing legal costs and property value impacts. By the end of the meeting, the board had approved a resolution requiring me to remove my custom driveway and replace it with a standard-approved design at my expense, with work to begin within 14 days. The next morning, a large pickup truck parked in front of my house. The HOA president emerged along with a man she introduced as the contractor who will be handling your driveway replacement. "We've decided to be proactive about resolving this situation," she announced with a smug smile. "My cousin here is the best concrete contractor in the county. He's prepared to start work next Monday." The cousin handed me a quote for $27,000 to remove and replace my driveway with a standard concrete one. The quote was nearly triple what a job like that should cost. "This is ridiculous," I told her, handing back the quote. "I'm not paying for this." She lowered her voice. "Listen, I'm trying to be reasonable here. That Toyota of yours looks well maintained. Sign it over to me as payment for the contractor and we can consider this matter resolved. I need a reliable vehicle since mine was damaged, and this way you won't have to come up with the cash." That was when I knew this had never been about my driveway at all. She wanted my car and was using her HOA position to try to extort it from me. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Both of you. Now, you have until Monday to reconsider, she said as they left. After that, the fines start doubling daily. I immediately got to work. First, I called my insurance company and provided them with the security footage, police report, and photos of the damage. They assured me they would pursue her insurance for the costs and advised me to document all interactions with her going forward. Next, I visited the city planning office and requested a formal inspection of my driveway. The inspector came out that afternoon and provided a written statement confirming that my driveway met all city codes and had been properly permitted. I then contacted every HOA board member individually, sending them copies of the security footage, the inspector's report, and a detailed timeline of the HOA president's actions, including her attempt to extort my vehicle as payment for unnecessary work to be performed by her relative. 2 board members called me back almost immediately, horrified by what they saw. They revealed that they hadn't been properly notified about the emergency meeting and that the president had been making unilateral decisions without board approval for months. The real breakthrough came when I posted a simple question on the neighborhood's online forum. Has anyone else been pressured to use specific contractors for HOA compliance issues? The floodgates opened. Within hours, over a dozen neighbors had shared stories of being forced to use the same small group of contractors, all of whom had personal connections to the HOA president. Several reported paying thousands more than market rates under threat of escalating fines. One brave neighbor, a retired accountant, admitted she had been helping with the HOA financial records and had noticed suspicious payments from the HOA account to a consulting company. A quick business registry search revealed that the company was registered to the HOA president's husband. With this new information, I formally requested a special HOA meeting following every procedural requirement in the bylaws to the letter. I sent proper written notice to all residents, scheduled it at the normal time and location, and prepared a detailed presentation. On the night of the meeting, nearly every homeowner in the neighborhood showed up. The energy in the room was tense but hopeful. The HOA president arrived late, sweeping in with her usual air of authority, but faltered visibly when she saw the crowd. I began by calmly presenting the facts: the security footage of her accident, the city inspector's certification of my driveway, and the documented pattern of her using her position for personal gain. As I spoke, other residents began sharing their own experiences, each story building on the last. "This is slander!" she suddenly shouted, jumping to her feet. "I've worked tirelessly for this community while you've all sat back and complained. My husband will have the city shut down your businesses. I'll make sure none of you can sell your homes without my approval." Her outburst did more to prove my points than anything I could have said. Even her loyal supporters looked uncomfortable now. The board called for an immediate vote on whether to remove her as president. The result was overwhelming, with only 2 abstentions and no votes in her favor. One of the board members, a retired attorney, then moved to appoint an interim president and launch a full audit of the HOA finances. The HOA president stormed out, threatening lawsuits against everyone, but the damage was done. Within days, her insurance company contacted me, accepting full liability for the damage to my property and informing me they were denying her claim for her vehicle since she had been trespassing at the time of the accident. The police investigation expanded to include allegations of fraud and misappropriation of HOA funds. The city council launched an ethics investigation into her husband's involvement with HOA contracts, and the new interim HOA president, a thoughtful retired teacher who had been intimidated into silence for years, led the board in creating new transparency requirements for all HOA decisions. As for my driveway, it was professionally cleaned to remove the oil stains, and the damaged landscaping was replaced using the insurance settlement. The new HOA board unanimously approved a resolution affirming that my driveway design was compliant with all regulations. 3 weeks after the meeting, I spotted her driving a rusted 15-year-old sedan through the neighborhood, a far cry from her luxury Range Rover. My trusty 4Runner sat in my driveway, untouched and definitely not being used by anyone but me. The neighborhood has slowly healed from her reign of terror. Last weekend, the new HOA board organized a block party to celebrate community renewal, and with my permission, they held it partially on my wide driveway, which provided the perfect space for the children's chalk art contest. As I watched families enjoy themselves, the retired teacher who now led the HOA approached me. "They want you to join the board, you know," she said with a smile. "Everyone's impressed by how you stood up to her." I thanked her, but declined the offer. I'm happy to give advice when needed, but I think I've had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime. Standing up to a bully isn't easy, especially one with power and connections. But documenting everything, knowing the rules better than they do, and building community support can overcome even the most entrenched corruption. My driveway looks better than ever, my SUV remains mine alone, and our neighborhood is finally becoming the peaceful place I hoped for when I moved in. Sometimes justice comes in the form of a hydroplaning Range Rover and a security camera that captures every entitled moment. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My former boss was, simply put, an absolute ducking a-hole. He was the type of person that had the ability to be so condescending while acting as if he was doing you a favor. His condescending attitude was sometimes downright abusive, and he seemed to have a particular problem with all of the female employees. He acted as if they were dumb and needed assistance with every step. He loves to scream at people regardless of how little their mistake was, if there even was one. He was a slave driver and expected everyone to sacrifice their own personal lives for their job. The thing that sparked this revenge was him telling me to miss my older sister's birthday to come into work on a day that I already booked off. No one liked him. Me and all of my colleagues in the department, around 10 or so, couldn't stand him being here anymore. So we did the protocol. All of us piled together the evidence we had of him not sticking to booked-off holiday schedules, having inappropriate and sometimes abusive language, and we brought it all on one Google Doc. This was step 1. Step 2 was getting a cherry on top. We did this by getting him to do one of his screaming tantrums at one of us. We wanted this to be as damning as possible, and the youngest and smallest girl out of all of us volunteered to be the bait. She made an intentional beginner's mistake in her paperwork, something bound to get her roared at, and the idiot took the bait. You see, he likes to do his scoldings in front of all of us to prove a point or rule by fear, as he called it. This gave us the perfect opportunity to film it from behind our desks and add I to the Google Doc. Now you see, in our company there's this really not well-made email system. You can send an email to an entire department, and I mean entire, as long as you have its name and manager's name. But the thing about this was the fact that all of this information was completely and freely given to employees. This means that a person could send whatever email they want to the entire company, including the CEO. So one morning at 10 a.m., to ensure that as many people would be working as possible, we made a burner email and sent the Google Doc through an email to everyone in the company. It took a little while as there were many departments to get through, but we got there in the end. We gave the email the subject, boss's name, vital information, branch name, department name. Of course, our boss received the email as well, and you could basically hear the clutter from his office as people all over the company were contacting him to ask him what the hell this was about. HR did a light investigation into him and took heavy disciplinary action. As far as I know, he wasn't directly fired, but instead he resigned. And a month after that, we never saw him again, and he was replaced by a new guy who was also an a-hole, but just less of one. His expressions during the whole ordeal helped me sleep at night. The next one is a malicious compliances story. This happened where I lived in college. It was a very liberal, progressive city, which was one of the reasons I chose to live there, so this incident really stuck with me. This one neighborhood on the outskirts of the city was a bunch of old, but still in good shape, tract homes, with the majority of them being homeowner-occupied, and had a primarily Hispanic Latin population. Well, as home prices skyrocketed, this neighborhood became one of the few affordable places to buy a home in the whole county. My friend and her brother had bought their house while the prices were still decent, and I was renting a room there. We are white but love the culture, and are not trying to change it. It was the kind of place where on Fridays we would walk down to the neighborhood park where a bunch of taco trucks set up and eat and hang out with the neighbors. Everyone was very welcoming, and we got invited to all kinds of cookouts, quinceañeras, and the first funeral I had ever been to that was a huge party with dancing and laughter that truly celebrated the person's life. Still one of my favorite neighborhoods ever. One day, we are out front talking to the neighbor across the street, who is super nice and friendly. Suddenly, this older white woman quickly waddles up to us and just starts talking. She doesn't even introduce herself. But I think we all know she is Karen. Karen is talking to the neighbor in that very exaggerated way that means she doesn't think he speaks English, so she must speak loudly with big gestures. This is just straight up racist based on his looks because we were speaking English when she rolled up on us. She tells him, not asks him, but tells him that it is time for him to paint his house. At this point, she is doing over-exaggerated Karate Kid, paint-the-fence gestures and saying, "Paint! You know, paint the house!" We are all stunned into silence with WTF, looks on our faces as she keeps going. "That light blue is no good!" Shakes her finger in his face. "No good! It's too bright!" Shields her eyes from the house like she was looking into the sun. "Too bright, do you understand?" Now, there is no HOA or city ordinance limiting the colors of the houses in this neighborhood, but none of the houses had any unusual or unique colors. These were tract homes with only about 5 different colors when they were built, and most of them were the original color or something similar. The neighbor's house was still the original color, so this light blue is not unique at all. It's literally one of the most basic colors and is on a lot of homes that were built during that time. Also, the paint on his house was in good condition, not peeling or anything. So, my roommate, the neighbor, and I all find our voices at about the same time, with my roommate saying, "What the duck are you talking about?" I'm like, "Who the duck are you?" And the neighbor going off in a tirade of very loud and fast Spanish. But Karen is undaunted in her quest. Realizing my roommate and I speak English, she starts telling us how she just moved in and she's trying to protect her home's value, and it's obviously time for him to paint the house, and she wants the neighborhood to have a certain color palette with more neutral tones instead of this carnival thing that was going on now. Yes, she pronounced it like the celebration in Rio, but over-exaggerated, and it was clear she had never been to Carnival or even seen pictures of Carnival because, again, the houses were mostly the same boring colors from when they were built or similar. My roommate and I keep interrupting her and telling her she is being racist. Nobody cares what she wants. The paint looks fine. She has no right to tell him what color he can paint his house, and this neighborhood's culture was established long before she showed up. So if she doesn't like it, she can move because she shouldn't have moved here in the first place with that attitude. Suddenly, the neighbor waves his hands in front of our faces while saying, "No, no, no, no," and then pointing to himself, and that's when we realize the neighbor is acting like he doesn't speak English. Since roommate and I know he speaks perfect English at this point, we are just trying to contain our laughter, waiting to see what he's going to do. Well, he starts talking to Karen in Spanish, the same slow, loud way she was talking to him in English, complete with big gestures and everything. Now, I don't know Spanish very well, but from what I could understand, he is telling her the colors of the houses in the neighborhood and how her house is blue, darker shade, and his house is blue, so what is her problem? Karen clearly doesn't understand and is getting more and more upset, but when she looks at us for help, we tell her that we don't understand what he's saying either. Karen is fuming, and we are trying and failing to contain our laughter. This goes on for just a couple of minutes before the neighbor's 10-year-old son comes out on their porch and loudly asks him if they are going to Grandma's for dinner, in perfect English. The neighbor then turns to his son and says they are leaving as soon as Mom gets back from the store, also in perfect English. He then turns back to Karen and starts speaking to her in Spanish again, and although I don't know exactly what he said to her, there was definitely some swearing and at least one not nice name to call a woman. He then says to us, "See you Friday for dinner," in English, and walks away. It takes Karen a few seconds to realize what is going on, then her face turns bright red and she is just sputtering. Unable to put together a complete sentence, we just walked away, still laughing. Now here is the malicious compliance part, I think. A couple of weeks later, I'm out of town for a couple of days and get back very late at night. As I'm getting my bags out of the car, I realize that it is very bright out. I know it's a full moon, but something is just not right. I start looking around thinking one of the neighbors must have put in some walkway lighting or maybe even a floodlight over the garage. And that's when I see it. The neighbor across the street had done what Karen wanted and painted his house. A beautiful bright orange. And I mean, this thing was practically neon. Under the light of the full moon, the house actually looked like it glowed in the dark, and that was why it was especially bright out in the middle of the night. I laughed so hard I was in tears. The next day, seeing it in the daylight, the color was actually more of a peach than a neon, and looked nice, but for whatever reason it was glow in the dark orange at night. Some might even call it a carnival orange. It surprised no one that Karen turned her home into a rental and moved somewhere else. The next one is an entitled people story. Today was one of those days that just tests your patience. After a long, exhausting day with my wife and kid in his stroller, I just wanted to get home. I was already running on low energy, but of course, life had to throw a little extra at us. The first bus arrives, but nope, we can't get on because the stroller spots are taken. So now we're stuck waiting another half hour, the kids starting to squirm, and my desire to just be home growing with every passing minute. Finally, the next bus comes along. It's fairly crowded, but I only see one stroller, so I ask the driver if we can get on. He says there's a spot available. Relief. We step inside, only to run straight into her, a woman in her 50s, comfortably seated on the foldable bench in the designated area, the kind of seat that's only meant to be used when the bus isn't full. Around her, shopping bags stacked up like furniture, taking over the space. I move in with the stroller, expecting some kind of reaction. Nothing. Okay, fair enough. Sometimes people get distracted and need a little nudge, so I do the obvious. Point out that this is the reserved area and we need to park the stroller properly, and that's when the fun begins. At first, she ignores me, not even an acknowledgement. Then, when I directly address her, she acts annoyed, shuffles some of her bags around but barely makes space. The gap she leaves is barely enough to shove the stroller in, definitely not in the safe position it needs to be in case of a sudden stop. Now I'm tired. I already had to let the last bus go. I don't have the patience for this. I keep it polite, but I make it clear. She has to move. Probably came out a bit sharper than I intended, but honestly I wasn't in the mood for diplomacy anymore. She resists, complains, talks about how she has her groceries, how the bus is already packed, how I should just deal with the space she generously left. I push back. We go back and forth until finally the driver steps in. He announces, loudly enough for the whole bus to hear, that if the stroller isn't positioned correctly, he can't drive and that she either moves or gets off. That changes everything. Suddenly, I'm no longer just some stroller guy annoying her. Now, she's the reason the bus isn't moving and the whole crowd is watching. With dramatic frustration, she snatches up her bags, squeezes herself into whatever space she can find, and, of course, starts mumbling about how unfair this all is. Loud enough for everyone to hear, hoping for sympathy, but no one bites. In fact, what she got were nasty looks, which eventually shut her up. In the meanwhile, we settled the stroller properly, exhausted, but ignoring her completely. Thankfully, our kid stayed calm almost through the whole thing. The last 5 minutes he started being noisy, but luckily we managed to half-handle the situation until we finally reached our stop. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.